Welcome to Monday Morning Express, where today we've gone back in time where a lot of you may remember a hobby shop that looked a lot like this, filled with amazing stock through the years. But Charlie, I gotta say, it looks like you haven't sold anything since the last time I was here a few years ago.
Probably the world's most unsuccessful hobby shop, you're right. But the day after I'm no longer with us, my wife Margaret's going to put a cash register right here, and the sales will go crazy, believe me.
Now that you mentioned it, I did not see a cash register.
That's correct.
What a cool way to show off your collection, and I know you build a lot of things too. We'll talk about that and a lot more today on Monday Morning Express. Well, Charlie, thanks for having us to your home/hobby shop.
Yes.
I did notice this sign, and I think we should probably warn our viewers that this is a contagious disease, collecting model railroading, because whether we know it or not, probably most of us have at least this much stuff.
That's correct. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I have more people visit with their spouses, right? Usually a wife.
Right.
And the guy will come in here, take a look, immediately grab his wife, bring her in and say, "Look, dear, I'm not so bad after all." And they've actually thanked me for having this because they say, "It makes me look great. I only have 15 boxes in the garage."
That's funny. Well, I think we all collect a little more than we realize sometimes, but that's part of the fun of the hobby.
It is.
Now, we focus obviously on brass models on our show, and there's a lot of those throughout here too, but it's really neat to kind of take the trip down memory lane, look at the history of the hobby, the progression we've made. I know that you love to build kits is one of your favorite parts of the hobby, right?
I like structures, whether scratch or kits, but because I write for a magazine called the Narrow Gauge Shortline Gazette, and I have for eons, I do a lot of review items. In fact, in front of you are review items that are going to be in upcoming issues that I just finished, because I tend to build them and plunk them here, so I remember to take them for photography. And so these are all kits. And yes, you're right, because I'm doing review items, they're mostly kits. Obviously, you don't want to review something you have to scratch build. And so I love doing that, and I love structures enough that I overwhelmingly do structures. But I also do freight cars and things occasionally too.
Sure. Yeah. So what have you noticed through the years, like some of the changes in the hobby, the progression and the innovations?
Well, we've gone from stick models, I'd call them, basically the old Campbell approach, and Campbell's still made, and they're very, very good kits. No one's done destructions better than Campbell. To ones that are laser cut, have 3D printed details. This is a Monster Model Works kit. Jimmy Simmons of Monster Model Works does very innovative things. All laser engraved brick, but it's all wood, and 3D printed parts. And that's kind of the trend, and you'll get these kits like this one is from a Canadian manufacturer, which I just finished for review. And again, every single piece on here is wood, but it looks like metal, and it looks like it's almost injection molded for the windows. And the laser is able to do that with very, very thin cross sections, so they can use a aircraft plywood and cut it thin enough that it looks like styrene plastic. And so that's really a kind of a neat thing.
It makes it a little easier to build and work with.
Makes it a lot easier to build, very precise. So what the advantage is, you can weather like wood, but they assemble with the ease of plastic.
Very nice, and they do look great, yeah.
And then you have resin. This is a Lund kit, Lunde, and they were the folks that originally started with Magnuson. That was their first name. And then Design Preservation. And they did a lot of work for Woodland Scenics until just recently. So they're well known, and this is resin cast. The wall's one piece, the windows are separate, but again, easy assembly, beautiful to finish, looks really nice.
Yeah, his castings are excellent. I built several of those kits myself. The painting can be a little tricky, but...
Painting can be tricky.
You're obviously good at it with all your experience through the years.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Charlie, one of the first kits I had the pleasure of building was this Builders and Scale Getz gas kit. And I thought it was a great looking kit, but I never knew the whole story. So you got to fill me in, because you just told me some things I wasn't aware of.
Well, I was friendly with Jim and Jan Haggard, who, the late Jim Haggard, Jan's still with us, thank heavens, who owned the company, started the company. And they named this after me, not for the reason you might think with the name gas in it.
Yeah.
Not that reason.
I see on this side it has baked beans, and then the sign says Getz gas.
I did that on purpose. Okay. I added that one. That wasn't on the kit. There's a baked bean sign. But it's because my profession was lawyer. So obviously a gas bag, a lawyer, very similar. So it was named after my profession as being a lawyer. So it was Getz gas, because I do talk a lot. And I kind of enjoyed that notoriety, but it's pretty weird to have a kit named after you, number one, and then number two, to be named after you for gas.
Yeah, well, I think that's
a nice building. I mean,
yeah, I think that's a great compliment to someone who loves building structures, is to have a Craftsman kit named after them. And I got to tell you, I've seen this kit on almost every layout I've ever visited, so I bet they sold a lot of them.
They sold a lot of them, and they're still not sure it's because of the first name or the second part, the gas part. So.
Very good. Thanks for that little behind the scenes. And we were going to show on the wall, too, you have some of the original artwork that was used in putting that kit together.
They wanted to make sure I got credit for this. Now, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, but I'll take it as a compliment.
Well, on Monday Morning Express, we're viewing it as a compliment.
I agree.
This is Jimmy Booth, and you're watching Monday Morning Express from the Roundhouse in Durango, Colorado.
Nancy, I thought we could just talk a little bit about the history of soundtracks, and of course we can touch on Blackstone models a little bit maybe.
Sure.
And we could probably take some of our viewers down memory lane as we talk about, we think kind of even pre-DCC is when soundtracks got its start, right?
That is correct, yeah. When I met my business partner, we were working at a marine electronics company together in Massachusetts, a little town called Pocasset. And he had an idea for what was essentially a digital sound decoder, but he sort of put that on the back burner because at the same time there was a group which is now known as the DCC Working Group, which was developing a standard for digital command control. So this was pre-DCC when there were still a lot of carrier control systems, so similar but no standard.
So we could think of like maybe Keller on board. What were some of the other
Keller
sound
on board, CTC 16,
right.
Dynatrol.
Yep.
So those were all carrier control systems that operated much like DCC, but they weren't part of a standard.
Okay.
So you couldn't mix and match them. And that truly, once that standard was begun to be developed, that really is what kind of propelled all of this forward, because suddenly you had the backing of a lot of different companies, and you could mix and match decoders and command stations and boosters in some cases, not all, but what's on the track is a standard.
And that was one of the concerns early on, like if you went with this system or this decoder, then that's all you could use. And so when those standards got set, it kind of made that market a little bit more manageable for the user, not just the manufacturer, correct?
Yeah, and I think, sometimes people get confused by standards and recommended practices. So, there are standards. If you're going to do this in your decoder, you must do it this way. Then there are recommended practices, which are, this is how we suggest that you do it.
Right.
So, but they're all designed to keep the communication working properly between decoders and, like I said, anything that's on the track. So it doesn't necessarily mean that command stations and boosters are all interchangeable, but command stations and any decoder ought to be able to communicate.
Good. And now take us back to some of the early days of soundtracks. What were some of your first products that you really pushed?
So Steve, as I said, he put aside, Steve, my business partner, Stephen Dominguez, put aside the idea of a DCC sound decoder while they were fleshing out the standard. So instead, we developed something called an S220 and a D220 IR, which were under-table sound systems that used a remote control, an infrared remote control. And they were pretty popular, but they were still not our first product. They were our second product. Because we were unknown, nobody knew who we were, and here was a product that was going to sell for, $250, $300. We felt that we needed a product to introduce ourselves to the model train market. And we developed something called a Hyperlight that will be a flash down memory lane for a lot of people. And today our Hyperlights are all built into our sound decoders. but it was the first microprocessor-controlled electronic circuit board that did various lighting effects. And it was something that the user could change by either making or cutting a connection to change it from a Mars light to a Stratolite to, you know, whatever beacon that they were interested in.
I remember them. I'm sure a lot of our viewers remember them. So that goes way back. Now, if we come up to today, you know, the modeler and the end user is getting much more demanding. The product's getting more sophisticated, higher quality. What are some of the big changes that you've seen here at Soundtrax, or things that you're proud of, innovations that you've had and so forth?
Well, I think industry-wide things have gotten smaller. If you, you know, were to look at some of the products that are in this middle case over here, you'll see the top shelf has our first 2 decoders that we ever made off of our own SMT line here, not using contract manufacturing. And then if you look at the next shelf down, and you'll see a much smaller decoder on that little plaque there. And it's essentially the same thing with more technology, more memory, better sound systems, better algorithms, slower motor control. Everything continues to get better, and yet it's half the size of what we made the first time around.
Yeah,
so.
And like when we were downstairs, it was really neat, because I think a lot of people that use Soundtrax, we just assume that's made over in China somewhere, but you have it being produced right here in Durango, Colorado.
We have never produced our electronics anywhere but either in Massachusetts or in Colorado. For a few years when we first started the company, we did use contract manufacturing, first on Cape Cod and then just northwest of Denver. But since we've purchased our own SMT line back in 1998, it's always been made right here.
Yeah, and I imagine those of us who have been involved in business in the industry, 25 years ago, it must have been hard to imagine you'd be in this building, in this beautiful facility with this high-tech equipment.
No question. I'm pretty sure my first thought when Steve talked about starting the company was, yeah, okay, well, that'll be a fun little side project.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we talked a lot about Soundtrax, and that's a big part of our interest, but let's talk a little bit about Blackstone models. They've been great for the industry with narrow gauge. We're right across by the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railroad. So tell us a little bit about what's went into that product.
So we were looking to kind of diversify a little bit. You know, we didn't want to necessarily always be having all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, and we felt like there was a hole in the whole manufacturing for model railroads. There wasn't much coming out for narrow gauge. Brass had become very expensive. It didn't run particularly well. It's gotten better, but back then, HON3 brass was expensive and kind of problematic. And, you know, we were always commenting, we'd go to these layout tours during the narrow gauge convention. There was always somebody banging their fist on the layout to get something to move. And with our experience with sound decoders, we felt like we had a really good idea of how to make an engine have good pickups, run well, sound well. And so we decided to do something that we knew, which was Colorado narrow gauge.
So your goal with Blackstone really has been to get something that operates well, and then you've been fortunate in leveraging, owning Soundtrax to be able to make sure that they've got the most up-to-date electronics as well.
That's right. But also, you know, understanding, you know, years of customer service with customers who would call up and want to know why their engine wasn't running well. You know, one thing that DCC doesn't do is it doesn't take a poor running engine and make it run well. If it runs poorly, it's probably still going to run poorly. It can help, but it's not going to overcome mechanical issues.
Right.
And so we felt that we could take all of that experience that we had with our customers in DCC and apply it to a good running engine with all-wheel pickup. Something that shouldn't cost as much as people seem to think it does. So yeah, no, it was something that we felt strongly about. We have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it because it isn't something that we make here, but we do make the electronics here.
Even with the advances we've seen, and I think it's fair to say it's gotten easier to use, and more of the end users are familiar with DCC and Soundtrax and so forth, but a lot of us would still like to continue that education and get better at it. Is there anything you plan that could help us in furthering that education?
Yeah, we've got a couple of thoughts. Over the past couple of years, we've had something here in Durango called Soundtracks Academy, where we have invited modelers to come and spend time with the Soundtracks staff, learn about our products, how to use them better, how to get more out of them, simple understanding about what DCC is and isn't. The problem with it is that you can only take care of 25 or 30 people at a time before it just becomes unwieldy. And there are a lot of people who can't afford to come out here and spend a week with us. So what we'd like to do is move forward to take this to a series of webinars. And we intend to do that sometime this year. I don't have a schedule for that, but we feel like we could get a lot more people, working with us and learning from us, and in smaller bites where they're not quite so overwhelmed too. But we would love to expand that 25 or 30 people a year to hundreds.
Sure. Well, that's great. Hey, we appreciate that you're willing to put that out there, because that's going to really make the hobby a lot more enjoyable. And so we can't wait to see when they come out. Let us know, and then we'll let our viewers know as well. Well, thanks, Nancy, again for the beautiful inside tour here. We sure appreciated being able to visit you today.
You are welcome.
We got a piece that's, well, it's a little unique, probably won't come across it much, but some of the principles we can use that you're going to explain to us in the soldering process. So tell us what we're going to do here.
Okay, we took this cab to frame plate off. This is what attaches the frame to the back of the cab. This is a Toby. No way that would have ever broken off unless you threw it against the wall. But we're using it as our guinea pig to show you how to put this back on. Some of the earlier models, when they put the frame on the boiler, you might have a millimeter space there.
Okay.
And each time you take it off, you're bending that back plate in. The end of the frame right here should always be in contact with this.
Okay.
If you've got a space in there, it's going to bend it in as you put the screws in it. And after so many times, it may break on the first time you take it apart. Because a cold solder joint or...
Show us how to take care of it then, and some other things you mentioned here.
Okay, now I'm going to, you want to get all the old solder off.
Okay.
Now, I've done a little of it while we were on our break, but on this back plate, I put a little glob of solder. Let's assume that's the old solder.
Okay.
And here, this is some soldering braid. It soaks up solder. The rosin in it's kind of gone bad from years, so I will coat it with some flux. And I'll take my soldering iron here, and the reason why I got this paper towel on here is to keep all my heat in the plate. So I'm going to set it, clean off my tip. I don't want any solder on that tip. And I'm just going to set that soldering braid right down on that. It may stick on you. See, it's gone.
Look at that. Because obviously you used that flux for that purpose, right? It helped it.
It helped, yeah. This I've had this quite a while. It's old, and the flux is dried up in it.
Okay.
So, but you can see.
Yep, it's right on there.
It's right on there. It soaked up that block
Very
of
nice.
solder.
Okay, so that's a great little technique.
So I'm going to take this little sanding wheel here.
Take this out of your way.
Get that out of the way, and I'm going to clean up this place. Get rid of some of the excess solder that's on there. Square up the hole.
And Hal, one of the other things, if you could mention, is that we did prior to, also you talked about, and here, let's put this guy over here on our plate so we can see it, is these handrails going into there. You opened up the holes just a little bit, right?
Yeah, I've got a small, I believe this was 0.5 millimeter balled in burr, and I could see where the little dents in the solder, and I opened them up, so it makes it
easier,
to,
right?
to push things in.
Okay.
Now this is a little tricky to get in, but what I'm going to do is, let me get my optivisor out here. But you move that plate for me there.
Okay.
You don't need that anymore. Okay, that is in position.
Okay.
I'm going to make sure it's vertical, which it is. I have, as you can see, take my fingers away. I've cleaned off the solder off and the tarnish off of this and then the black plate. And I'll get my flux, put a bead of it down. Now I want you to hold that for me.
Okay.
And I'm going to get my, I'll use the tweezers. And I'm going to put some solder on here. And I'm going to run the tip of that soldering iron right. That's what I like about the liquid flux. The solder will go.
It flows nice, don't it?
It flows right where the flux is. Now I'm going to put some more flux right here because this originally was soldered on both sides. And I'll just take this tip now we're going to put the handrails back into the holes. Okay, I'm going to put a little flux on the back of the, and use the existing solder that's there. Get that one in.
Nice and clean. Boy, you've opened up the holes just a little bit, and that solder is going to flow right around in there.
Haven't got that one in the hole yet.
This one?
Clean off some of the solder off this handrail. There we go. I think I'll put a little flux on that one as I cleaned it off. She's all,
Yeah, that's a nice repair.
and this one was an unusual mounting way. First time I ever seen a locomotive that had nuts on the back rather than screws. Well, we won't put that back on.
So for the purpose of this soldering, so
Yeah.
we're able to see those nice, the bracket is nice and straight, and you got the handrails in nice and easy. So another nice technique that we were able to take away from this one. So nice job, Hal. You're going to show us a little more on how to solder a broken detail part. In this case, it's a blowdown spreader, right?
Yes.
That's what is falling off the loco here. And so we've taken it apart to save a little bit of time, but it's best to be able to, and some parts you just got to take.
Well, it's easy to get.
it
This
off.
is soldered on the inside,
Right,
and
right.
be very difficult with the mechanism. So
Okay.
I've taken it off. I
Excellent.
put this little alligator clip on here to keep the model from.
Oh, that's a
rolling
good
on.
idea. That's a
Keeps
real
it
good idea.
stabilized.
Yeah, because you don't want it moving
I
around.
don't want it moving around.
Okay, so tell us what you're going to do. You're going to
Okay,
use
first
your...
thing I'm going to do, you look in here, it's kind of corroded, so I'm going to take my little polishing wheel and I'm going to go in there and kind of clean off that brass.
Because that's the old solder joint in there.
Yeah, there's still,
And it should get a little shinier, right? Yeah. Just a
okay.
little.
Now I'm going to put I'm also going to go and just run this little polishing wheel around.
And we noticed that you have the part in these hemostat.
Yep.
Because it's going to get hot.
Okay.
And of course, for positioning, right? It helps you hold it.
Yep. And this is going to be, now I'm going to take some liquid flux. There's my solder. I'm going to put some flux on the inside, put some flux on this. Always keep the lid on this bottle.
Don't want to spill it.
I always, I got to clean up. And I can use when I do solder work, I like the big tip.
Okay.
And I'm going to tin that tip. Go right back in there where it goes. And if you could hold that a little
Sure.
bit for me. And there it is.
All right. So now let me ask you a question then. Is there any benefit, or is it, okay to do could you tin the piece, the detail piece first? Would it matter?
You could do that. In this case, since I've got both surfaces clean and plenty of flux in there, it'll solder will flow right in.
Okay.
And that's not a, you can see,
Sure.
I'm not worried about cosmetic appearance or something
Right.
on the inside as long as it holds.
And it's a good hold, and it's good solder joint, so you can bend it a little bit just to put it back in place. Yeah.
This would probably break off before the solder joint would.
Okay. Okay. And that's how you repair a small detail part? You
Yep.
have to take it apart. Nice job. Very quick, easy repair.
That's an easy one.
Especially when they're on the unpainted ones, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Charlie, we got to give a little shout out to one of the great publications in our hobby. Tell us a little bit about
sure.
the Gazette.
The Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette is probably, and don't let the name fool you, it's one of the best model railroad magazines out there, especially for people who build. And Bob and Irene Brown, who have been the guiding force ever since it started back in 1975, are still there. Last year, they have a new publisher, White River, which will ensure that it will continue for the foreseeable future. And I've been writing for this magazine ever since day one. I have nothing to do with the quality of it. It's a wonderful magazine. I don't want to take any credit for that part, but it's a great one. And if you haven't ever seen one, it's going to be on the newsstand now. So go find a copy and take a look and see if you don't agree that it's, if you're a model builder or a model railroader of any nature, this is a great magazine.
It's great to read, great for inspiration. We found it great to advertise in through the years because not only does it get good readership, but the quality is so high that, you know, those ads just really pop.
And there's a nice brass importer on the back,
Yeah,
PBL. There you are.
We love them, so we appreciate that. Now, the last thing, Charlie, the last thing we got to talk about is every model railroader has like a little side obsession or collection, or more than one.
Yes.
So you got to tell us a little bit about one of yours.
Well, one of my former ones, because now I'm kind of ready to move on, and if anybody wants to buy something, call me.
Okay.
But Star Trek, when I was in college, Star Trek was being filmed. And it was a great, great, great series. In fact, my roommate at one point, his brother was one of the red shirt guys, who was an actor named Bob Brawler. He was killed twice in the series. He both times wearing a red shirt, but he was an extra and he was a stuntman. And so I had a connection there, and I also did some model building for one of the studios to make extra money when I was in college. And so when they wrapped the series in 1969, and I was a junior then, I got a call that they were selling things off the back dock, which was a phrase they used, because in those days they didn't keep all the neat little costumes and props, because they never envisioned this would ever have a life after TV. And that series, I hate to say it, was a failed series in the sense that it went 3 seasons, but it kind of limped along. So they never envisioned that Star Trek would become the phenomenon it has, let alone Star Wars. So I was able to go to the Desilu lot, now Paramount, or later Paramount, and get an honest-to-gosh phaser. This is a real phaser from the original TV series for peanuts at the time, but for me it was a lot of money because I was just a student. So here's a phaser. Here's an original phaser from the series, and this is called a queuing prop because in those days, before CGI, which is computer-generated imaging, they would have to make a noise, and this one actually makes a noise, not now, when you push the button, and that would tell the other actor it's being fired, and they would then react, and then the post-production department would mat in, they called it, a beam of light. Draw it in, actually, a beam of light to show the phaser was actually being used. Nowadays, the toys, here's one, the reproductions are so good that you actually have the noise, if I can get it to work.
We'll have to see if Pat can get us a little beam in there.
So, and then I have one other one to show you, pardon me for turning away. Here is a communicator. These are the famous communicators, and this is called a close-up prop, because most of the communicators were just vacuum plastic with Velcro glued on the back. Very, very anticlimactic because they would slap them on their costume belts, and that way they could have them hanging there. You see that on the show. But this one was for close-ups when they would actually be doing something. And sure enough, the toy is better than the original. Here's the toy, which has better color, has noise.
Yes.
And there you go. So, but here's a real one if you ever want to see one. So it's something that these got me into collecting the toys and the books and the figures and all that. But you can't have two hobbies. One has to go. So I am ready to move on. And if anybody's a Star Trek fan and wants to buy a fabulous collection, have their people call my people.
Watching Monday Morning Express.
Right. Yeah, Star Trek people always watch Monday Morning Express.
Roland, beam me up.
Yeah, beam me up, please. Better yet, beam me some brass.
Yeah. The only thing I would say, if you sat across from anybody that was really tall, it would be a bit tight.
It's a little tight.
Yeah.
Knee knocking.
But I'm comfortable, and so it seemed like the perfect spot to talk about an upcoming passenger project you're working on,
Right.
Chuck.
So we have the Illinois Central, and actually at the same time we're going to produce 10-6 sleepers. On the website, it's 2 different tabs. So if you go down the Illinois Central tab, you'll see the City of Miami train, the City of New Orleans train. The era that we're producing is between the mid-50s and mid to late 60s. And we've got 8-car sets, and then there are 4 different 3-car add-on packs, so you can stretch your train out. One of the special things about the project is the Burnside rebuild cars.
Right.
And we've been quite fortunate that we had a lot of information to begin with which was hard to come by. And then we still had a few questions. And Nick Muff and I had the chance to go to Alamosa, Colorado. We were hosted by Iowa Pacific, and we really appreciated it because we found an untouched Burnside Rebuild lounge, number 3320 there. So we were able to get dead accurate information about all the underbody equipment, the roof detail, and the end detail. So these are going to be very accurate Burnside rebuilds, along with other Pullman-built cars that ran in those trains.
And was there anything that surprised you when you got to look at the original untouched car about those?
A little bit. We weren't real clear about what the air conditioning system was. And I'm not going to say right now because I don't want to make a mistake. I can just tell you that I remember Nick's reaction when we walked up to the car and he said, "Oh my, this is a," and so he's got photographs. We must have 50 photographs of the car. And so when you look at that air conditioner, you're going to see on the plate exactly who it was manufactured by in tiny little letters. Then we also have the 10.6s we're doing at the same time, and that's a couple of basic cars that were painted for a number of different railroads. And in addition to doing the smooth side ones that ran around on the East Coast, we're going to do the fluted stainless cars that were mostly southeastern cars, and many of those made it through on the Sunset Limited. So that should be of interest to West Coast guys as much as East Coast guys.
Very nice.
So it's a good looking set, that's for sure.
Yep.
Hey, you mentioned, Nick's done a lot in helping you with that research and everything. And you talk about the data packages that you put together for SAHO. Mention some of those. I mean, it's a lot of information.
Well, we do a 2D CAD drawing for every car, and the engines. We're also producing the Illinois Central E units, and we're going to do one version that's lettered for Central of Georgia. There's a 2D CAD drawing, and then there are also photos on photos on photos of that we put on a digital media along with the CAD drawing, and we send over to SAHO. So the photos go from a pan shot of the entire car to right down to tiny little details like the manufacturer's plate on an air conditioner housing.
And that really helps SAHO because of the accuracy now.
That's right.
Because he has all of that information.
That's right. We're not guessing at anything.
Excellent.
He can take the 2D CAD and all the photos, and then he turns that into a 3D CAD drawing, and that's what dictates what actually gets built in the pilot model and the production models.
And Chuck, you mentioned that this is a really nice sized project. In fact, in total, how many cars?
The Illinois Central part of the project and the 10.6s together is a minimum of 500 cars, and that's spread out over the 17 different versions. And then there's going to be a minimum of 100 E units,
100 E.
predominantly A units, and there's two versions of the B unit. It's really, it's one A unit, one B unit, and the only differences are the numbers, and one of the A units is going to be lettered Central of Georgia.
Okay. So a nice sized project, again, that we're looking forward to.
Yep.
You guys keep rolling out the projects, delivering, and we knew last year was a great year for you, and we look forward to the same this year in 2018, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Boy, I really learned something about Charlie. We were out there seeing him. He's really into some of those extra things like Star Trek. Isn't that cool?
I don't know why people collect that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe this picture will help refresh your memory. Looks like you're having a lot of fun there, buddy. You and Charlie going at it.
When in Rome.
Very nice.
It was fun. Charlie's a fun guy.
He is a good guy. He is a good guy.
I think like all of us, we just kind of collect all this crazy stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
Now, we had mentioned on soundtracks, and it was neat to see the history, how far back it went. I think last week we had mentioned that we would talk more about that Tsunami 2 decoder, but actually we're going to kind of split that up, and starting in next week's episode, we're really going to show them the breakdown of what they can do with those new decoders and how they don't really need to be afraid with like programming them, how they can be reset. So there's going to be some nice info there.
Yeah, some good training there. So, and also we're going to get back, How To with Hal. We're going to be in our final segment now. It's been pretty cool what we saw today, but it gets even better next week in our final of this soldering series with Hal.
Yeah,
so
I know guys are really enjoying.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of feedback about it. And we want to keep any feedback we get,
keep
as you mentioned a few times, send the emails. And then we have some of this planned, but we'll keep incorporating those little things that people send in. So. Now, we still don't have our Season 3 mug, so I've had to go to my Red Solo mug. Red Solo mug, MME3.
Yeah.
Can't get this just anywhere.
Yeah, okay. Keep it for yourself.
Desperate.
I can't believe how long it probably took you just to draw the logo on there.
I am desperate.
Well, hey, listen, too, we wanted to highlight about our sale.
Right.
You know, our spring sale. It starts today. So you can go to our site right now, brasstrains.com. You'll see the sale. It's in effect for 1 week.
As soon as this episode is over, drop what you're doing and be the first to get everything on sale.
Yeah, right? You're looking forward to that.
And now also for next week, we're going to go out to Bob Bolt's.
Yeah.
Beautiful layout. We know our viewers will enjoy that. And I think that's it for this week.
That's it. Good show.
Thanks for joining us on Monday Morning Express. And now go shop at brasstrains.com for all kinds of brass trains.